Hello, this is Ron Paul with your weekly update for Monday, March 24th. It was almost 10 years ago when, before the House International Relations Committee, I objected to the U.S. government funding NGOs to meddle in the internal affairs of Ukraine. At the time, the Orange Revolution had forced a regime change in Ukraine with the help of millions of dollars from Washington. At that time, I said, we do not know exactly how many millions or tens of millions of dollars the United States government spent on the presidential election in Ukraine. We do know that much of that money was targeted to assist one particular candidate, and that through a series of cut-out non-governmental organizations, both American and Ukrainian, millions of dollars ended up in support of the presidential candidate, close quote. I was worried about millions of dollars that the United States government funded National Endowment for Democracy and its various organizations spent to meddle in Ukraine's internal affairs. But it turns out that was only the tip of the iceberg. Last December, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland gave a speech in which she admitted that since 1991, the U.S. government has, quote, invested more than $5 billion to help Ukraine in the development of democratic institutions and skills in promoting civil society and a good form of government, close quote. This is the same State Department official who was caught on tape just recently planning in detail to overthrow the Ukrainian government. That $5 billion appears to have bought a revolution in Ukraine. But what do the U.S. taxpayers get, who were forced to pay for this intervention? Nothing good. Ukraine is a bankrupt country that will need tens of billions of dollars to survive the year. Already, the U.S. selected Prime Minister has made a trip to Washington to ask for more money. And what will the Ukrainians get? Their democracy has been undermined by the U.S.-backed coup in Kiev. In democracies, power is transferred peacefully through elections, not seized by rebels in the streets. At least it used to be. The IMF will descend on Ukraine to implement yet another of its failed rescue plans, which enrich the well-connected and the international bankers at the expense of the local population. The IMF adds debt, organizes sweetheart deals for foreign corporations, and demands that the local population accept austerity in exchange for reform that never seems to produce the promised results. The groundwork for this disaster has been laid by NED and USAID and the army of NGOs that have funded over the years in Ukraine. Supporters of National Endowment for Democracy and its related organizations will argue that nothing is wrong with sending U.S. dollars to promote democracy overseas. The fact is, however, that NED and USAID and others have nothing to do with promoting democracy and everything to do with destroying democracy. It is not democracy to send in billions of dollars to push regime change overseas. It isn't democracy to send in the NGOs to rewrite laws and the Constitution in places like Ukraine. It's none of our business. How should we promote democracy overseas? First, we should stop the real isolationists, those who seek to impose sanctions and blockades and restrictions that impede our engagement overseas. We can promote democracy with a U.S. private sector that engages overseas. A society that prospers through increased trade ties with the U.S. will be far more likely to adopt practices and policies that continue that prosperity and encourages peace. In 2005, arguing against funding at NED in the U.S. Government Assistance Authorization Bill, I said this: the National Endowment for Democracy has very little to do with democracy. It is an organization that uses tax money to actually subvert democracy by showering funding on favored political parties or movements overseas. It underwrites color-coded people's revolutions overseas that look more like pages out of Lenin's writing on stealing power than genuine indigenous and democratic movements. Close quote. Sadly, matters are even worse now. To promote democracy overseas, National Endowment for Democracy and others meddling U.S. government-funded NGOs should be disbanded immediately. Thanks for calling this update. A new update is placed on this number, 888-322-1414, every Sunday. The written text can be found on my Ron Paul Institute website at www.ronpaulinstitute.org and on my Facebook page. Thanks for listening.